In the quiet African village of Kidala, life moved slowly, following the rhythm of the sun and the rain. The mornings began with the crowing of roosters, the laughter of children, and the smell of cooking fires that filled the air. Among the many huts that stood near the tall mango trees lived a woman named Mirembe. Mirembe was known for her gentle nature. She greeted everyone with a smile, even those who spoke unkindly about her. Her eyes carried warmth, and her voice was soft, like the evening wind that brushed across the fields. She was loved by many, yet she carried a quiet sadness. She had no children of her own. In Kidala, being a mother was seen as a blessing and pride. The women often gathered at the well to talk about their children, their laughter, their mischief, their future. Mirembe listened with a smile, but her heart sometimes ached. When she walked by, some whispered, "Poor woman. Her womb is empty." Others pitied her but did not understand the strength it took to smile through the loneliness. Still, Mirembe never allowed sadness to rule her. Every day she woke early, swept the yard, fetched water, and tended to her small garden. She grew cassava, beans, and plantains and shared them freely with her neighbors. Whenever someone was sick, Mirembe was the first to visit with herbs, soup, and care. The children of Kidala adored her. Every evening after chores were done, they ran to her small hut near the edge of the forest. Mirembe would sit outside on a wooden stool, her colorful kitenge cloth wrapped neatly around her, and the children would sit on the ground in front of her, waiting eagerly. She told them stories about the tortoise who wanted to touch the moon, about the greedy hyena who lost everything, and about the brave little bird who taught the lion to be humble. When the stories ended, she shared sweet fruits, mangoes, oranges, or roasted groundnuts, and the children's laughter filled the air like music. "Thank you, Mama Mirembe," they would shout before running home. Mirembe would watch them go, smiling, her heart both full and aching at the same time. Sometimes, when the moon rose and the night became quiet, Mirembe sat by the doorway of her hut and looked at the stars. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "If I cannot have my own child," she would whisper to the sky, "then let me still be a mother to those who need love." There was something special about her love. It was not loud or proud but patient and deep. She never complained about her life. When others quarreled, she helped them make peace. When a child cried, she comforted them as if they were her own. Once, during the rainy season, a terrible storm struck Kidala. The wind tore through the village and many roofs were blown away. The next morning, Mirembe went from house to house, helping people repair their homes. She gave away her stored food to families who had lost theirs. When someone asked why she helped so much, she said simply, "When I give love, I feel full." The people began to see her differently. Even those who once pitied her started to admire her. They realized that though she had no child from her body, she carried the heart of a mother, one big enough for everyone. One afternoon, as Mirembe sat outside weaving baskets, little children gathered again. A small boy named Juma climbed into her lap. "Mama Mirembe," he asked, "why don't you have children of your own?" Mirembe smiled gently and brushed his hair. "Sometimes," she said, "the earth gives us a different kind of gift. Some mothers give life to one child. Others, like me, give love to many." The children listened quietly, not fully understanding, but they felt her warmth. From that day they called her Mama Mirembe, not just out of kindness but out of love. Whenever she walked through the market, people greeted her warmly. The sellers gave her extra vegetables, the elders called her to sit beside them, and the children ran to hold her hand. Even the village chief, Old Cato, once said, "A woman like Mirembe brings honor to Kidala." A mother's love is not measured by birth but by kindness. Still, at night, when the world was silent, Mirembe sometimes looked at the empty mat beside her and felt the ache of loneliness. But she never let it break her spirit. She knew her purpose was larger than her sorrow. One morning, while walking through the forest to gather firewood, Mirembe paused and listened to the singing of birds. The air smelled fresh after the rain and sunlight fell through the trees. She smiled to herself, feeling peace inside. "Maybe," she thought, "this is what it means to be blessed, to love without asking for anything in return." Every small act of hers, every smile, every story, every shared meal, became a seed of love in the hearts of the children of Kidala. And though she had no child who called her mother, the whole village began to see her as something greater, the mother of all. Her love would soon be tested in ways she never expected, but her gentle heart, built from years of quiet strength, was ready for whatever fate had planned for her. The sun was setting over the village of Kidala, painting the sky in colors of gold and red. The air was calm except for the distant sound of drums from a nearby celebration. Mirembe walked slowly along the narrow path to the river, balancing her clay pot on her head. She often went there in the evenings when the world was quiet. The river always brought her peace. Its sound reminded her that life kept flowing, no matter how hard things became. As she reached the riverbank, she knelt to fill her pot with water. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the surface, and frogs croaked from the tall reeds. Then, through the soft rush of water, she heard something strange, a faint cry. It was weak, almost lost in the sound of the river. Mirembe froze. She listened carefully. The cry came again, thin and desperate, like the voice of a baby calling for help. She placed the pot aside and stood up. Her heart began to beat faster as she followed the sound. She pushed through the tall grass, her bare feet sinking into the soft mud. The cries grew louder. Finally, under a big fig tree, she saw a small bundle lying on the ground, wrapped in an old piece of cloth. Mirembe gasped and knelt down. Inside the bundle was a baby, a tiny boy with dark eyes and trembling lips. His face was dusty, his skin cold, and he cried softly as if his strength was almost gone. Mirembe's heart ached. "Oh, my poor little one," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. He stopped crying for a moment as if he could already feel her warmth. She looked around, hoping to see someone nearby, but the riverbank was empty. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone. Whoever had left the baby had vanished. The sky was turning darker now, and crickets had begun to sing. Mirembe wrapped the baby tightly against her chest and started walking home. When she reached the village, people gathered, curious. "Whose baby is that?" an old woman asked. "Where did you find him?" another shouted. Mirembe explained what had happened, but no one knew of any woman who had lost a child. Some villagers whispered among themselves. "Maybe the spirits left him," one man said fearfully. "You should not keep him." But Mirembe held the baby close and said firmly, "A child is a blessing no matter where he comes from." She refused to listen to their fear. That night, she cleaned the baby, fed him warm milk from a calabash, and laid him on a small mat beside her. As he slept, his tiny hand reached for her finger and held it. A tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered, "You are safe now, little one." In the morning, the chief sent a messenger to call her. Chief Latalo sat outside his hut, his face serious. "Mirembe," he said, "I have heard what happened. Are you sure you want to care for a child you know nothing about?" Mirembe bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, chief. The child was left to die and the spirits guided me to him. I cannot turn away." The chief studied her for a moment, then smiled softly. "You have a brave heart, Mirembe. May the ancestors bless your kindness." She thanked him and returned home. From that day her life changed. She named the baby Cato, meaning the second-born twin, because she believed the world had chosen him to find a new mother. The days that followed were not easy. Mirembe had never cared for a baby before. She stayed awake at night when Cato cried, sang lullabies to calm him, and worked harder than ever to gather food and make clothes for him. But she never complained. Every time she looked into his small brown eyes, her heart melted. His laughter filled her home like sunshine after rain. The villagers who once doubted her began to visit. Children came to play with the baby. Women brought porridge, herbs, and cloth. Slowly, Cato became part of the village. When he smiled, everyone smiled. Mirembe's home, which had once been silent and lonely, was now full of life. Every morning, the sound of Cato's giggles woke her before sunrise. She would lift him into her arms, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "You are my gift from the river." As months passed, Cato grew stronger. He learned to crawl, then to walk. He followed Mirembe everywhere, holding her wrapper and laughing when she stumbled. When she went to the garden, he sat beside her, playing with stones and singing baby songs. One day, as Mirembe walked through the village with Cato on her back, an old man stopped her and said, "Your house used to be quiet, but now it sings. Truly, the spirits have remembered you." Mirembe smiled and replied, "Sometimes blessings come when we least expect them." The people who had once pitied her began to admire her. Children started calling her Mama Cato. She no longer felt the weight of loneliness because her days were full of laughter, little hands, and love. Every evening she still told stories, but now she had Cato sitting in her lap, clapping and laughing as she spoke. When she pointed to the stars and said, "Each star carries a story," Cato would giggle and point too as if he already understood. Sometimes late at night when the baby slept, Mirembe sat by his side watching him breathe. She thought of the day she found him by the river, so small and alone. She wondered who had left him there and why. Maybe his mother was gone. Maybe she was too poor or too afraid. Whatever the reason, Mirembe knew that fate had brought him to her. "Perhaps," she whispered to herself, The river wanted me to be his mother. From that day on, she treated Cato as her own flesh and blood. Her heart, once empty, was now overflowing with love. The sound of his laughter spread through the village, reaching even those who had once spoken ill of her. Her home became a place of joy, her name a song on the lips of children. And though she had not given birth, every villager began to see her differently, not as the woman who had no child, but as the mother whose heart was big enough for any child who needed love. The years passed softly over the village of Kidala, and Mirembe's life changed in ways she never expected. The baby she had found by the river had grown into a bright, cheerful boy. Cato ran through the village every morning, greeting everyone he met. His laughter echoed like music and people smiled whenever he passed by. Mirembe often watched him play, her heart full of pride. She had once been a woman of silence, but now her home was alive with laughter and love. One afternoon, as Mirembe worked in her small garden, she heard a knock at her hut. When she opened the door, she saw a thin boy standing there holding a piece of dry bread. His eyes were full of fear and hunger. "Please, Auntie," he said quietly, "I have no one. My mother is gone." Mirembe's heart softened. Without a second thought, she welcomed him inside. She gave him warm food, water, and a mat to sleep on. That night, as Cato and the boy lay side by side, Mirembe sat by the fire and thought about how life had changed since the day she found Cato by the river. She whispered, "Perhaps my heart still has room for more." Days turned into weeks, and word spread across the village that Mirembe had taken in another child. Then another came, a girl whose parents had died during a fever. And then two brothers who had lost their father in the mines. One by one, children found their way to her small hut, like lost birds finding a nest. At first, Mirembe worried. Her hut was small, and her food was never enough for so many mouths. But she never turned anyone away. Every morning, she rose before sunrise, cooked porridge, fetched water, and made sure each child was fed and dressed. She taught them how to wash, sweep, and share. Her days were long and tiring, but her heart was light. Sometimes, when she went to the market, the villagers would whisper kindly, "There goes Mirembe, the mother of many hearts." Others began calling her Mama Wawot, meaning mother of all. She smiled whenever she heard the name, for it reminded her that love was not only about blood, it was about kindness. Her home became known as the House of Laughter. Anyone passing by could hear children singing, clapping, or laughing from inside. The walls were made of clay, the roof patched with dry grass, but inside there was warmth and peace. The children painted the walls with bright colors and drew shapes of stars, trees, and smiling faces. In the evenings, Mirembe told stories around the fire. The children sat in a circle, their eyes wide with wonder. She spoke of brave warriors, wise women, and talking animals that taught lessons about love and courage. Sometimes Cato would interrupt, saying, "Mama, tell the story of the river again, the one where you found me." Everyone laughed, and Mirembe would smile and say, "Ah, that one never grows old." But life was not always easy. There were days when the food ran out and the firewood was gone. During the rainy season, the roof leaked and the floor became muddy. Yet even on those hard days, the children's laughter never stopped. They learned to help one another, to share, and to find joy in small things. A mango, a song, a rainbow after the storm. One day, a traveler came to the village. He was a merchant who had heard of Mirembe's kindness. When he saw her house filled with children, he was deeply moved. "How do you care for so many?" he asked. Mirembe smiled and said, "Love grows when it is shared. The more children I care for, the bigger my heart becomes." The man was so touched that he left a large basket of grain, clothes, and soap for the children. When the villagers saw his generosity, they too began to help. Some brought food, others brought old clothes or firewood. Even those who had once doubted her now respected her deeply. As time went on, the children under Mirembe's care grew strong and kind. They learned to help others in the same way she had helped them. When someone in the village fell sick, they fetched water and cooked food. When a neighbor's roof was broken, they worked together to fix it. Mirembe often said, "Kindness is like a drum. When you strike it, the sound travels far." Cato, now older, became her helper. He worked in the fields and taught the younger ones how to plant beans and fetch firewood. "Mama taught me how to live with love," he often said proudly. Sometimes, when the moon was bright, all the children gathered outside the hut, singing songs of joy. The sound of their voices floated through the night air, reaching even the farthest homes. People passing by would stop and listen, smiling in the dark. It was said that even the stars seemed to shine brighter above Mirembe's hut. One evening, the village chief visited her. He stood by the doorway watching the children eat and laugh. "Mirembe, he said softly, you have done something no one else has done. You have turned a small hut into a home for the lost. You have given hope where there was none. Mirembe bowed her head humbly. Chief, I only did what any mother would do. The children needed love and love was all I had to give. The chief nodded. You are more than a mother, he said. You are a blessing to Kidala. From that day the villagers honored her. On feast days they brought her food and gifts. During harvest time they helped her repair her home. Her hut, once lonely and quiet, became the heart of the village, a place where laughter lived, where every child was welcome and where no one felt forgotten. Years later, people would tell stories of Mirembe, the woman who had no child of her own but became the mother of many. They would say that her love was like the river, wide, strong and never-ending. And even when her hair turned gray and her hands grew weak, Mirembe would still sit by the fire, surrounded by children's laughter, her eyes shining with peace. For she knew that her greatest gift was not what she had given, but what she had received, the love of many hearts who now called her Mama. The sun burned hot over the land of Kidala, and day after day, no clouds crossed the sky. The grass turned yellow, the rivers shrank into dry cracks, and the earth grew hard beneath the people's feet. It was the beginning of a terrible drought, one that would test every heart in the village. Mirembe woke up one morning and found her small garden completely dry. The maize plants that once stood tall were now brown and withered. She touched the soil, but it crumbled to dust between her fingers. Her heart sank. The children were still sleeping inside, their small breaths soft and peaceful. She knew that when they woke they would ask for breakfast, and she had nothing left to cook. That day she boiled a small pot of water and mixed it with the last handful of maize flour. The porridge was thin and weak, but she served it with a smile. The children ate quietly, pretending to be full. Mirembe could see their hunger, but she did not let despair take her voice. We must not lose hope, she told them gently. Even the dry season has an end. As the days passed things grew worse. The river that had once given her water was now only a line of cracked mud. The goats were dying and the sound of crying children filled the air. The village of Kidala had never known such hunger. People whispered that the spirits were angry. Some villagers began leaving to search for better land, but Mirembe stayed. She looked at the faces of the children she had taken in, Cato, the two brothers, the girl named Lindy and many others. She could not abandon them. One morning she gathered them all outside the hut. The sun was already blazing, but she stood tall and said, "We will not give up. The earth may be dry but our hearts are not. Where there is love there is strength." She decided to walk to the distant hills in search of water. It was a long and dangerous journey, but she believed she would find something there. The children watched as she tied a cloth around her head, picked up her old pot, and began walking down the dusty road. The road was hot and endless. Her feet ached and sweat dripped down her face, but she kept moving. Along the way she met travelers who said the same thing, there is no water anywhere. Still she walked on, whispering a prayer with every step. Let me not return empty-handed, she said softly. At last she reached a small valley between two rocky hills. There she noticed green plants growing from the ground. She knelt and dug with her hands, and to her joy, water slowly rose from beneath the earth. She cried tears of relief and filled her pot. The earth still has life, she whispered. When she returned to the village, her clothes were dusty, but her smile was bright. The children ran to her shouting, "Mama is back." She poured the water into a clay jar and gave each child a small drink. It was not much, but it was life itself. That evening she sat outside her hut, thinking about the others in the village. She knew she could not keep the water only for her children. So she took her pot and went door to door, giving a little to each neighbor. Some were surprised, some were ashamed, and others cried with gratitude. The next morning a few women from the village came to her. "Mirembe," they said, "we cannot let you do this alone. Show us where you found the water." She led them to the valley and together they dug more holes. Soon they discovered a hidden spring that could give water to the whole village. When the chief heard the news he came to see it himself. He looked at Mirembe and said, "Because of your courage the people of Kidala will live. You have saved more than your children, you have saved us all." The days that followed were still hard. Food was scarce and the heat showed no mercy. But something had changed in Kidala. The people began to help one another. Those who had food shared it. Those who had energy carried water. Men repaired broken roofs and women cooked together. The village that had once been quiet and divided was now full of unity. Mirembe's kindness had become the heartbeat of the community. Every evening, people gathered at her hut to eat together and share stories. The laughter that had once belonged only to her children now filled the whole village. Even in hunger there was peace. One night, as the moon hung low and pale, Cato sat beside Mirembe. He was older now and could see the lines of tiredness on her face. "Mama," he said softly, "you always give everything away. Aren't you afraid there will be nothing left for us?" She looked at him, her eyes gentle and calm. "My child," she said, "when we share, the heart never runs dry. The earth may take away food and water, but kindness never ends." The next morning, dark clouds finally gathered in the sky. The wind grew strong and the smell of rain filled the air. Children ran outside shouting, "Rain! Rain is coming!" Mirembe stood at her doorway, tears of joy falling down her cheeks as the first drops touched her skin. The drought was finally over. The ground drank deeply, the rivers flowed again, and the green returned to Kidala. But more than that, the people had changed. They had learned to stand together, not because of fear but because one woman had shown them the power of love and courage. After the rains, the chief held a great feast in Mirembe's honor. As everyone ate and danced, he raised his voice and said, "This woman had no child of her own, but she became the mother of our village. Her heart gave birth to hope." The crowd cheered and the children ran to hug her. Mirembe laughed, her eyes shining with tears. She had once been the woman of silence, but now her name was spoken with respect and love throughout the land. And though her hands were rough and her body weak from the long years of work, her spirit stood tall like the great baobab tree, strong, giving, and full of life. The long months of dryness had finally ended. The sky, once empty and cruel, was now full of dark clouds that promised life. The people of Kidala watched as rain poured over the land, washing away the dust and sadness that had covered their hearts. Children ran barefoot through the puddles, laughing and shouting. Women clapped their hands in joy, and men raised their faces to the sky, thanking the heavens for mercy. In the center of the village stood Mirembe, her old dress soaked but her heart full of peace. She looked around at the green shoots breaking through the wet soil, at the smiling faces of the people, and at the children she loved so deeply. The land was alive again, and so was her spirit. Days passed and the village began to bloom once more. The river that had been dry for months now sang loudly as it flowed between the rocks. The gardens were planted again, cassava, beans, maize, and yams. The air smelled of wet earth and new hope. Every morning Mirembe could hear laughter, songs, and the sound of children playing outside her hut. Her home, once a quiet shelter for the lonely, was now full of voices, a house of family and love. Word spread through nearby villages about the woman who had saved Kidala during the drought. People came to see her, some to thank her, others to learn from her. Mirembe welcomed them all, offering food and a kind word to each visitor. She never saw herself as a hero. To her, she was only a woman who had done what her heart told her was right. One evening, the village gathered under the great baobab tree. The drums were beating and the smell of roasted maize and meat filled the air. The people were celebrating the return of the rains, and more than that, the return of life itself. Children danced around the fire, their laughter ringing through the night. Chief Latalo, an old man with a strong voice and wise eyes, stood before the crowd. He looked around at his people, healthy, happy, and united again, and then his gaze settled on Mirembe, who sat quietly at the edge of the firelight, surrounded by children. He raised his hand for silence. "My people," he said, "tonight we celebrate not just the rain, but the strength that kept us alive when the land was dry. When hunger came and fear grew among us, one woman stood firm. She gave when she had little. She comforted when others complained. She believed when many had lost hope." The crowd turned to Mirembe and she looked down shyly, her hands folded in her lap. The chief continued, "We call her Mirembe, but from this day forward she shall be known as Mama Wawot, the mother of all. For a true mother is not only the one who gives birth, but the one who gives love." The crowd erupted in cheers. The drummers began to play faster, and women ululated in joy. The children ran to Mirembe, hugging her legs, her arms, her waist, calling out, "Mama! Mama Wawot." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at their smiling faces, Cato, Lindy, the twins, and so many others. She could hardly speak. Her heart felt so full that words seemed too small. "Thank you, my children," she whispered softly. "You have all made me a mother." That night, as the fire burned low, Mirembe sat quietly thinking about her life. She remembered the years of loneliness, the whispers of people who called her barren, the empty nights when she prayed for a child. But now she realized that her prayers had been answered, not in the way she expected, but in the way her heart truly needed. She did not have one child to call her own, she had many. And each of them had filled her home with laughter, her days with purpose, and her life with meaning. As the stars shone above Kidala, Mirembe listened to the sound of drums fading in the distance. The children were asleep inside, their soft breathing like a lullaby. The night air was cool and calm. She whispered to herself, "I once thought I was alone, but now I see, love makes its own family." The next morning when the sun rose, the whole village came alive again. Women fetched water, men worked in the fields, and children helped replant the gardens. Mirembe moved from house to house, helping where she could, laughing, teaching, comforting. Her presence had become a part of every home, like the wind that touched every leaf. Years passed, and the story of Mama Wawot spread far beyond Kidala. Travelers told her tale in distant markets and faraway villages. People said there was a woman whose heart was big enough to hold all the children who needed love. And though her hair turned gray and her steps grew slower, Mirembe's spirit remained bright. One day, as she sat beneath the same baobab tree where the chief had honored her, a group of children gathered around her, asking for a story. She smiled, her eyes twinkling, and began to tell them about a time long ago, when a woman with an empty hut found a baby by the river, and her life was changed forever. As she spoke, the children leaned close, listening to every word. They didn't realize that the story was her own. And Mirembe, their mother of many, looked at them and felt peace. That night, when the sky turned gold with sunset, the village of Kidala glowed with warmth. Families sat together, fires burned, and laughter filled the air. Mirembe watched it all and felt joy deep in her heart. She had not been born to carry one child, she had been chosen to carry many hearts. And so it was said, long after her time, that in Kidala there once lived a woman with no children of her own, but whose love gave birth to a whole village. Her name was Mirembe, and she was the mother of many.